Welcome to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. We provide fiction reviews for the lit, curious reader, because why not try a little of everything? Our scholarish approach and cozy book club atmosphere makes literature accessible to everyone. Whether you're a casual reader or a devoted bookworm, join us on our literary journey to explore all genres. Hello, and welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs. I'm Joey, and today Jennifer and I will be having an affair with Ken Liu and his short story, The Paper Menagerie, which is the titular story from his short story collection published in 2011. Let me start with a little bit of a bio. This is the author bio provided by himself on kenliu.name. Ken Liu is an American author of speculative fiction, a winner of the Nebula, Hugo, and World Fantasy Awards for his fiction, and he has won top genre honors abroad in Japan, Spain, and France. Liu's most characteristic work is the 4-volume epic fantasy, The Dandelion Dynasty, in which engineers, not wizards, are the heroes of a silk punk, which he created that word, by the way, because I've never heard of that, and I've read lots of fantasy, of a silk punk world on the verge of modernity. His debut collection of short fiction, The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories, has been published in more than a dozen languages. A second collection, The Hidden Girl and Other Stories, followed. He has also penned the Star Wars novels, The Legends of Luke Skywalker. His latest book is All That We See or Seem, a techno thriller starring an AI whispering hacker who saved the world. Prior to becoming a full-time writer, Liu worked as a software engineer, corporate lawyer, and litigation consultant. He frequently speaks at conferences and universities on a variety of topics, including futurism, machine-augmented creativity, history of technology, bookmaking, and the mathematics of origami. In addition to his original fiction, Liu also occasionally publishes literary translations. His most recent work of translation is a new rendition of Lao's Dao Jing. Liu lives with his family near Boston, Massachusetts. So I have not read any of his other work, but that's on the New York Times 100 greatest books of all time. The Goats, I believe the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty, is on that list, so it is going to be a must read for me. Do you want to add anything before I give the
So
synopsis?
I just wanted to say that I was not familiar with his work and I am completely charmed. And even reading his bio, I'm like, yes, please, more of that. All the things that I love in one convenient package. So he's a lawyer, he's a translator, he's doing all the things. So I'm very excited to discuss this story with you today, Joey.
Great, because that's what we're here to do. Okay. So here's the summary of this story. In the Paper Menagerie, Jack recalls his childhood with his Chinese mother, who breathed life into origami animals to comfort him. His parents met when his father chose her from a catalog despite her fabricated details. Growing up, Jack cherished her paper creations like Lahu a tiger. However, after facing racism from neighbors and peers, Jack rejected his Chinese heritage, distancing himself from his mother and her traditions. He stopped speaking to her, embarrassed by her broken English and cultural differences. Years later, as his mother lay dying of cancer, she asked Jack to remember her by revisiting his childhood origami on Qingming, a Chinese holiday. After her death, Jack discovered a letter hidden in Laohu, revealing her heartbreaking life story, her escape from poverty, exploitation, and her journey to America. She expressed her deep love for him and her pain over his rejection. Overwhelmed with guilt and grief, Jack finally reconnected with her memory, folding Lahu back into shape and embracing the heritage he had long denied. The story poignantly explores identity, cultural alienation, and the enduring power of a mother's love. Jennifer, would you like to give us your first impressions?
Joey, I was completely charmed with this story. I just read it today, so I will be transparent on that. I have read it twice because it was that good. The first time I read it, I was overcome with emotion and I was just sitting at my computer screen sobbing. And I thought that
Mhm.
was just very interesting for a lot of reasons. He starts us off with the story, and this is the only reason I'm going to say this to you. His introduction to the story for us, and apparently I took it a little bit too literally. One of my earliest memories starts with me sobbing. I'm like, well, one of my most recent memories, thank you, Mr. Ken Liu, is that I was also sobbing as a result of the poignancy of the message in this story. The more I have thought about it and revisited the topics he brought in here, the more incredibly complex and beautiful this story is. And I'm just really delighted by it. So, Joey, I'll save the rest for the topics that we'll be diving into, but I was just completely in the story.
Mhm.
How about
Yeah,
you?
I read this story. I don't remember when the first time I read it. It was a recommendation from a booktuber that I really like. and we have similar reading tastes, and it sounded good. But when I first read it, I don't remember. I remember being like, "Oh, that's really sad." But this time when I read it, I reread it yesterday so I could start like taking my notes. I literally started. I cried all the way at the end, obviously with the letter from his mother, and I was like, "Oh." Oh my god, this is too much. I was pretty maybe not sobbing, but I was really upset, really upset. Like I knew it was coming, but I didn't remember that it is quite like that. So it was super impactful. And the story is so short. How many pages is it? Like my edition was 13, but it was like the margins were humongous. So it's probably like 6 pages
Yeah, it was like
altogether.
little mini half pages on my
Yeah.
screen.
So in such a short amount of time, he got both of us. I don't think I've ever cried at any of the stories that we have read. I cry at books all the time, but not any of the short stories that we have read for whatever reason. I guess they're not super sad all the time. But in such a short amount of time, he got us to love this character, and we never even learned her name. We knew almost nothing about her the entire time, except for at the very end when we read her letter. And I was like, Mr. Liu, this is killing me, okay? And it's such a simplistic story, really. It's very nuanced, but the basic idea is it's a very simple story. It's about a mother's love for her child and rejection. And then Jack's experience with racism and being othered. I think this is a great example of what great literature is meant to do, is because we both emphasize with this mother who we didn't know anything about, and we'll never, either of us will never have that same lived experience. Obviously, we're not from China. We didn't have the same circumstances growing up, being in different political turmoil and things like that. This is the closest we're ever going to get, and it was such a beautiful letter and so heartbreaking, and I hope everyone reads it, if only to read that letter at the end, because it is devastating.
Yeah, Joey, and you said we empathized with the mother, but I also empathized with Jack
Mhm.
of that realization. For me, this is a coming of age story, sort of for his mom and also for him, because he understands 2 years after her death and the revelation of what she had gone through, which he had never taken the time or energy to find out his mom's story. Once he hears that message from her, I think he never is going to go back. Like his innocence has been lost in that way. Like I think he needed that touchstone with his mom that she planted 2 years ago, more years ago than that.
Mhm.
And I think the reason the story was so effective is that he also puts this playfulness of this mythical creatures. I don't know how else to say that. These magical creatures that come to life that his mother gave him the gift of imagination. She makes these little origami animals for him and she breathes. She literally puts her breath into them to kind of inflate them. And it was like,
Mhm.
oh, right, that is the igniting of this child's imagination. And we see him mature and he's like, I'm too old for these stupid toys and they're just trash. And my friends are making fun of me. Like, I'm just going to put these away. And we're like, okay, I was a child during this same time frame, so I understand. Like, oh, when he said Star Wars, I was like, I remember the action figures and all the boys bringing them in. It was so cool. And I was like, I wasn't interested in that stuff. So I love that he could put us in a very clear timestamp, but this is a timeless story, I believe.
Mhm.
How about you, Joey? What kind of story is this? If you were selling the story to someone, what is it?
What I said before, it's sort of like the most simplified version of it. It is so many other things, but if I had to be like, "Whoa, what is this story about?" I would say it's about a mother's love. I mean, what an amazing way to show that in action and like in a practical application in the story by the mother breathing her actual life into these origami animals that come alive and entertain her son, and they become like best of friends. And I saw like the use of magic in this story because it's really magical realism. It's not really explained. It's pretty much just accepted, which is usually the indication that it's magical realism and not like a magic system in high fantasy or some type of fantasy. And I saw that as a way of explaining cultural tradition and how that is passed down throughout the generations. And it's like a learned skill. Jack doesn't know that he can breathe life into the animals. He knows eventually that he can, but he doesn't know why his mother can do that. He's just entertained and he's enthralled and in awe of his mother that she can accomplish such a feat. And it's something that's passed down through her lineage. I really just loved that exploration of how important it is for us to continue to pass down generations, cultural generations, to our offspring if we choose to have them. I will not, but I'll teach them to Frank.
And on behalf of Frank, woof. Okay, that sounds great. So, Joey, I love that you bring up the magical element because I want to read just a section of the story because in my notes I wrote practical magic and he uses that phrase. The mother has written this letter. We're hearing it after her death and we're learning key details about her life. And she's telling her son about the Great Famine. So, her first words here say, things got better after that. Singlu is famous for its origami paper craft, and my mother taught me how to make paper animals and give them life. This was practical magic in the life of the village. We made paper birds to chase grasshoppers away from the fields and paper tigers to keep away the mice. For Chinese New Year, my friends and I made red paper dragons. I'll never forget the sight of all those little dragons zooming across the sky overhead, holding up strings of exploding firecrackers to scare away all the bad memories of the past year. You would have loved it. And I love this idea of practical magic because she's
Mhm.
creating out of a flat piece of paper these three-dimensional creatures that she gives her sort of curiosity, her life spirit, her fun and playfulness. And it's a little bit of magic, right? Like there is something that they're like, why did this story show up out of the blue on this special day for honoring the dead and his girlfriend was gone and all of these things had to fall into place. And so for me that was that magical element of, wow, there sure were a whole lot of coincidences that had to happen for this to happen, but it was completely believable to me
Mhm.
because he had done such a good job of setting up the magic of childhood experiences with his mom and the fun that they had. We get exposed to this idea of the origami animals through that first sentence. You know, my first memory was of me sobbing and nothing could console me. So my mom sat down and started doing her magic with her fingers and creating this origami. And I just thought that was just, as you had said, a beautiful way to show a parent's love and her respect for her own culture. And she did the one thing that she knew only she could do, which was to
Mhm.
make these origami creatures.
Yeah, and I really like the comparison when the little neighbor boy comes over with his Luke Skywalker. No, it's an Obi-Wan Kenobi. There you go. Let me get my Star Wars facts, right? Jack does not have those toys. He has only the origami animals that are alive. Like if I was a kid, I would 100% want an origami animal that is alive. That's pretty cool. But anyway, we have this a juxtaposition between like this homemade toy and this store bought toy, the Obi-Wan Kenobi Star Wars toy, which is obviously, I'm sure all the kids in the neighborhood have it. Star Wars was obviously a huge thing. We have this theme of like consumerism that is sort of invading this space. And unfortunately, so many things happen to Jack at this very pivotal part of his life that really change him in like not I don't it's not really his fault. I don't want it to come out like he's changed for the worse because it's not his fault. It's things that are happening to him as a child. His dad is not really willing to protect him from those things because he wants him to assimilate. And his mother, there's a language barrier. So there is something literally stopping her from being able to intervene because she doesn't understand what might be being said or she doesn't understand the cultural nuance that's happening or whatever. He has that realization like, oh, this thing that my mom made me and that I have loved and that I have also, because at this point he's already breathed his own life into these toys that he was like pressing the air out and then he blew them back up. So he already knows instinctually that he does have this magic, this tradition, but he realizes that this is not enough. If he wants to fit it and to assimilate the way that his father wants him to, that he will need to have an Obi-Wan Kenobi or a Luke Skywalker or whatever the other action figures were. And so there are so many sad little parts, like when the two neighbors, the two women came over and started making all these racist remarks to him, and his mother obviously could not protect him in this moment, and it's not her fault. But I just love that idea of this very precious thing that I wish he would have recognized was so special.
In the moment. And Joey, I want to
Yes.
take you to that scene where Mark is the neighborhood kid who
Oh
comes
yeah, that's
over,
right.
and they had just moved. So, like, everything is new. They're just trying to fit into the neighborhood. So, Mark, one of the neighborhood boys, came over with his Star Wars action figures. Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber lit up, and he could swing his arms and say, in a tinny voice, use the Force. I didn't think the figure looked much like the real Obi-Wan at all. Together, we watched him repeat this performance 5 times on the coffee table. Can he do anything else? I asked. Mark was annoyed by my question. Look at all the details, he said. I looked at the details. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say. Mark was disappointed by my response. Show me your toys. I loved that I can totally relate to hanging out with 10-year-old boys with their action figures and me going like, "So what do you do with it?" It's like, "Yeah, you just push the button and it says this." I'm like, "But what do you do with it?" Like, what's the
Hmm.
point? Like, this doesn't sound fun. No, you're missing all the details. And I can shoot forward into the future 40 years, 50 years of people who are in my generation who are still collecting the little action figures and they still have them in the plastic and they're still like, but look, this one has the blue handle and not the
Hmm.
red handle. Isn't this awesome? I'm like, it's still a plastic toy. I just don't understand. And so I thought that was just a very relatable for people of my generation, specifically of that timestamp. I had written in my notes the imagination versus commercialization, right? He
Hmm.
didn't need these action figures to tell himself a good story or to have a good time. What I loved about the way that Ken put the story together, he was like, so after I told my dad, by not telling my dad how bad things are going at school because like I'm getting made fun of because I have this Chinese mom and I just don't fit and I'm the new kid and people are just really mean when you're 10-year-old boys. Specifically, I think he gets the full Star Wars action figure set. And the first thing he does is that he gives Mark the replacement for the one that was broken by the paper tiger. And I
Hmm.
just love that. I was like, oh, well, that was empathy and kindness and retribution for the attack that the tiger jumped on him. And I also love the playfulness of, wait, did you actually like smash that paper tiger in that kid's face? Like, what actually happened there? Because as you said, there's this magical realism. You can imagine that the tiger is doing something, but you also know it's paper. And so someone has to be making these things go forward. And it reminded me of the book The Life of Pi that has a
Hmm.
imaginary slash non-imaginary, depending on your point of view, tiger in a boat with a man. And I was like, oh right, kind of playing back on that theme of it's real if you believe it. So I think it's the idea that if you believe it, it is real. And I love just the playfulness. He's like, I can hear it purring. I'm like, that is a multi-sensory toy as opposed to the action figure that's just says the one phrase. It was like, I don't understand why those things are interesting.
I like the way that you had put it. What did you just say? It was commercialism.
Imagination versus
Yes,
commercialization.
that is how I like the way that you put that. I think that's exactly what I was trying to say, but I could not articulate as well. So, but yeah, I really like how that was a topic in this story because when you're a kid, like you were just saying, with these toys, even though some adults also do it, and that's fine. I don't think that a kid has that sort of sophistication to be like, I'm collecting this because of nostalgia. They have yet to have anything nostalgic. They haven't lived long enough. Whereas like adults, my generation, Beanie Babies were the thing. You need to collect them all. There's a little book that told you what it might resell for in the future. They're not worth very much anymore. So that sucks for all of us who had them. But the thing was that this was a status symbol. And I think that this is definitely when the pivotal moment when Jack starts to recognize, I don't have this thing. I'm othered at this point. And especially when we can see that Mark, I almost forgot his name, after Obi-Wan Kenobi has been killed, the toy, Mark says, this was very expensive. You can't even find it in the stores now. It probably costs more than what your dad paid for your mom. First of all, that means his parents were talking to in front of him about that. Inappropriate. Mind your business, okay? And especially don't say it in front of a child when you know that they're going to repeat it to the child it's directed at. So there's a lot of cruelty in this story, especially because we have right before that the scene with the two older women who come in and start talking about the shape of Jack's eyes, and that his name, Jack, it doesn't sound like a traditional Chinese name, and it doesn't have to be. He's not from China, and his parents are free to name him whatever they want. He can have any type of name that they want. It could be Nigerian, it could be English, it could be Welsh, it doesn't matter. We also, and they're saying it in front of him because they don't think he speaks English. No one told you he didn't. So again, we have this thing where he starts to recognize in himself, like, oh, I am not like them, because he's realizing that in American society, and I'm assuming I was not born yet, but probably in this, as especially in this time frame, that whiteness is the default. So he's recognizing, like, oh, I'm not that. I am not like everybody else that I'm looking at. There's probably not a lot of Chinese people or Asian people in general in this community that he's living in, because comments like that give me a good clue that they probably have almost no exposure to anybody of Asian descent, and they don't even know how to respectfully ask a question.
I don't think they were interested in asking a respectful question, Joey. I
That's
was
true.
so incredibly angry when the scene played out because the dad's being like, "Hey, we're new in town. I have to run and like fix an electric bill. So, that was a leftover
Mhm.
problem from the previous tenant." I'm going to read the quote. Make yourself at home. My wife doesn't speak much English, so don't think she's being rude for not talking to you. So he leaves. The kids reading in the dining room. The two neighbor ladies are like talking amongst themselves. And Jack makes a point of saying, it's like, and they weren't even talking quiet. Like they were just not even trying to keep this as an aside to themselves. The quote says, he seems like a normal enough man. Why did he do that? And then the next lady said, something about the mixing never seems right. The child looks unfinished, slanty eyes, white face, a little monster. Do you think he can speak English? The woman hushed. After a while, they came into the dining room. Hello there, what's your name? Jack, I said. That doesn't sound very Chinesey. And I loved the fact that he calls out how rude these women are. But the pivotal thing for me in that is they said, the dad, the white dad, looks normal enough. Why would he do that? Why would he
Mhm.
get an Asian bride? Like, what is that about? And the lack of empathy, the lack of curiosity, the blatant racism just made my blood boil. And I have a friend who grew up in the Midwest and has South Korean parents, is very Korean. He does not blend. And he was like, imagine being a shy little boy in a community where everyone looks at you like, where do you come from? Are you Vietnamese or something? Like, where are you from? Do you guys run like the Chinese restaurant? What are you? And just
Mhm.
how that shaped my friend's experience really resonated with me. I'm like, oh my goodness, how would that change your worldview? So I had a lot of empathy for Jack when he was like, I'm not like her at all. My mom, I'm not like her at all. And the beauty of the way the author laid that out for us as it starts unfolding, one of the things I wrote to myself is that you can't escape your genes. His Chinese hair, his eye shape, the color of his skin, he belongs to his mom, and there is no escaping that. And at one point, in the story, when he's a teenager looking at his mom, and she's like, oh, she's like singing to herself in Chinese and she's doing some housework and she just seems like really contented with her life in that moment. And in the letter we read later, we know she was very contented in that moment because she's like,
Mhm.
I finally have the family I always wanted. But he's like, I can't imagine I came from her. I can't believe that that person gave birth to me. And Joy, I'm going to just take one little tiny pivot on that. I am a carbon copy of my mother with a smidge of my dad put in there. So
Mhm.
I always knew who my people were and what I was going to look like at every age of my life because I'll just follow the path of my mom. I know you're a twin, so you probably have some of this other identification with another person who looks like you. The story progresses where we actually learn that Jack and his mom actually have a lot more in common than he knew at that moment. So I just wanted to pivot to that if you picked up on the parallels in their story and about how they progressed through their understanding of themselves.
I did not. I didn't even think about that. How his upbringing and her upbringing could have parallel, because they are, to me, they are very different. I mean, in circumstance, I'm curious as to what you're gonna say, because obviously we want I want you to share that. But yeah, I think it wasn't like Maybe because I was too blinded by the circumstance that she was living in while she was living in China, especially after we find out. Very early on in the story, we find out the relationship dynamic to an extent because it's on page 2 or on page 65, I guess, if you're reading from the actual book. Lou writes, Dad had picked mom out of a catalog, and that's it, full stop. And then another sentence, and it's indented. So, like, we're supposed to sit with that information for a minute. And I think it gives us a lot of information. I mean, we have to make a lot of assumptions at this point, but we can assume that her upbringing and her living circumstances in China was probably not the most idyllic because she entered into this program of trying to find a foreign husband to take her away from her setting. But I am curious as to how you drew parallels between Jack and his mother's stories.
So I drew the parallel of she put herself into a catalog to be selected to change her life.
Mhm.
And we hear from Jack that he says this about his mom. What kind of woman puts herself into a catalog so she can be bought? The high
Oh
school
man.
me thought I knew so much about everything. Contempt felt good, like wine. And then we fast forward a little bit into the future, and he says, oh, right, what do I have to say to these college recruiters to get my resume and my interviews and sell myself so they will buy me? He
Mhm.
uses the word so they will buy me. It's like, how is that any different than your mom putting herself out there to get a better life? And I just thought that was a very clever thing that the author had woven that storyline in. What was also interesting when we read the mother's letter that said, I lost all of my family, and I am fortunate to have people who share my bloodline are still on this side of the earth. I can't imagine her isolation of knowing that everyone that she came from is no longer with her, just their spirits, their memories, their genes running through her veins. So when she has Jack, she's like, oh my God, the best thing ever. I have this little Chinese looking son who looks like me, at least enough. I taught him his first words, which were in Chinese. I could see my mother and my father and my culture reflected back in this little miracle that I breathed life into. Like that came from me. I created this kid. And I just thought all of that was beautiful. And she said, I know you hate your hair. It's my hair. I know you hate your eyes. They are my eyes. I think it'll be very interesting. I'll just say, like, I want to know the part two of this story. He is dating Susan, his college girlfriend. Are they going to have kids? Is he going to understand his mother's perspective when he sees his own child reflected back in him? Is that a continuation? But his mom said, you were the one thing that made me feel like I belonged here. I finally had something that was mine. And I really resonated because my parents were teenage parents. And my mom said, you were a baby doll no one could ever take away. She loved being a mom. Like she thought that was the coolest thing ever. So that
Mhm.
I think resonated for me of when you come from really tough circumstances and you finally escape and get a husband and can have a child, it's a life changer and it's a lifeline. And I think that is just so beautifully illustrated in this story, even when your kid is an ungrateful teenage jerk, right? It did not stop the mom from loving her kid. But I think the author does a great job of being like, wow, I was kind of a jerk to my mom. I didn't like her accent, so I wouldn't allow her to speak to me.
Yeah, I think one of the most there's so many devastating parts of this, especially the letter. But one of the earlier devastating parts is when they deny her the ability to speak in her native tongue in Chinese because she cannot articulate. I don't live in a foreign country, obviously, so I can't imagine that. But I can imagine someone saying, "Joey, you can't speak in English. You can only speak in whatever language is foreign to me, all the other ones." And being like, well, I can learn things. I can learn very basic things like hello, how are you? Where's the bathroom? Kind of things like that. But I can't articulate my emotions. I can't explain what I need and what I want in life and how I feel about that other person and all of this very nuanced information. There'd be no way to speak it. I would have to just be quiet and keep it to myself. And that's exactly what happens to her. She literally says, if I say love, I feel here. She pointed to her lips. If I say I feel here. She put her hand to her heart. That's love in Chinese. So that's such a simple way of putting it. But she is, first of all, she's now speaking English. So she has to simplify the way that she needs to now communicate. Like, this is why I need to speak Chinese because it feels very artificial to her, or that's what I gather from that. It feels like, yes, I'm speaking, I'm going through the motions of speaking, but I'm not connected to what I'm saying because I can't. It's just not my native tongue. She does not know enough English to do that. I can't decide if I hated the dad or if I could be like, I sort of can understand based on the time and your limited amount of information. But I also think like you decided to marry a woman that was from China. You knew that she didn't speak English and then it was going to take her time to learn. He certainly isn't trying to speak Chinese or learn it. He could have done that. He could have met her in the middle. They could have both been bad at their each other's language, but they would have been able to communicate better instead of going to a diner or a restaurant and having a waitress or a waiter translate for him. But he says, okay, I'll just read this little scene. This is after she keeps trying to speak to Jack in Chinese. I brushed her hand away. I'm fine. Speak English, I was shouting. Speak English to him, Dad said to Mom. You knew this was going to happen someday. What did you expect? Mom dropped her hands to her sides. She sat looking from Dad to me and back to Dad again. She tried to speak, stopped, and tried again, and stopped again. You have to, Dad said. I've been too easy on you. Jack needs to fit in. And then that's the next quote is the thing that I just read. Well, what a heartbreaking moment where the dad is like, no, you knew this was gonna happen. I've been too easy on you. Like, oh my god, I would have punched him in the face if I was there. Do you think he's a villain in this story, the antagonist? Because I do.
So I have conflicting feelings about the dad because I know we're not supposed to psychoanalyze our characters, but that's half
Go
the fun of
ahead.
reading. That's why I want to read. I want to know what somebody's up to. I will make some ignorant assumptions, just like those ladies in the neighborhood. So I'm assuming this is a straight white guy in the 70s
Mm-hmm.
who decided for his own reasons that he wanted to pick his potential mate out of a catalog. That seems like an interesting choice because I'm assuming there were women in his community locally sourced that he could have dated or chosen. I do not feel that this was an instant love match. I think he was intrigued by her beauty. They said that she had her hair kind of draped artfully over her shoulder
Mm-hmm.
and her eyes looked like a calm child. So
Yeah.
there was
Oh,
this
that was a gross
intrigue. There was
description.
just some vulnerability. They said that she was 18. They said that she spoke English, that she had all of these skills. And it's like lies, 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 lies.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to be like, hey, poor peasant person just seeking a meal ticket. Apply below, right? Like, I don't think that's the sales tactic they were using. I was very curious about what the father's motives were for procuring a relationship in the way that he did. That power balance did not seem great to me, but it happened. So teaching his son, I don't know. I'm a little stuck on that, Joey, because when they're eating with the chopsticks and he's like, "What happened at school?" and he's like, "I don't want to talk about it. I'm never going to talk about it." And he was like, "We need to be more American." He's like, American people cook Chinese food." And it's like, "No, I don't want to be like that. We're not normal." And he said something to the effect of, "We're not an American family because mom doesn't fit in here."
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of belonging was really poignant throughout. Like, did the dad belong in his community because he's ostracized for getting somebody outside of the community and bringing her here and having the audacity of having a child with her? And my childhood sweetheart married a Chinese woman and has a Chinese son who is about 10 years old. And when I see my friend's face reflected in his half Chinese son, I was like, it's you, but it's not you. And it is such a beautiful melding of culture that I think in this day and time, it's much more accepted than it would have been when this story was taking place. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to not be mad at the dad. I want to not be mad at the dad because obviously he did help this woman out of a really bad situation. And It seemed like they had a loving relationship to the extent that they were participating in that. We don't have any abuse or physical abuse or financial mismanagement or any of those things didn't seem to be in the story. But the lack of empathy, as you said, it's like, oh, well, how many Chinese words other than the rudimentary ones did this father try to learn? I have an international cast of characters in my past and present, and I don't speak languages that they do. And I haven't made the effort to meet them because it's too uncomfortable. I'm like, no, 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 let's just speak English because that's the thing that's easy for me. And I feel that's what the father did is no, 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 let's just do the thing that's easy for me. And eventually you'll get the hang of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think my opinion about the dad is a little different because if you want to have a mail order bride kind of situation, my assumption is that he wanted someone he could control. He knew that this person was probably not going to be able to speak the language English once they came to the United States. She does not have access to money, it seems like. She doesn't have a job outside of being a housewife and a mother. She's not gaining anything financially every day. She has no connection. She has no family. She has no friends. So he has full control over her. I'm not saying that there is abuse. I don't think there is abuse. At least we don't see it here. And it seems like they are loving to some extent because during the scene when she's dying in the hospital, he seems very upset and he's very tender with her. And it's like a nice moment, as nice as that could be in that moment. I think his intent was to control someone. Whether or not he ended up doing exactly that, I don't know. I don't know. I can't say because I don't. This person's not real. I can't answer that question. But that is my assumption in this type of situation. I'm not saying he went full throttle there, but that would be what I would assume he wanted.
And the conditions are right for exploitation when
Yeah.
you have a huge power imbalance. You can't drive, you don't speak the language, you have no friends, you have no family. I'm not sure what recourse she had other than to make the best of it because she was really happy being a mom until adolescence hit with her son. And he was like, I'm ashamed of you. Don't speak. And, we talk a lot on this podcast about identity and authenticity and empathy and really what are the core tenets of loving yourself and someone else. Like, I think that resonates through our conversations. And I can't imagine, I'm not a parent either. I cannot imagine how difficult it would be to have the thing you love most in the world, which she said was her child, say, I don't want you to speak to me. You are not good enough to speak to me because your English is bad. Jack's first words were in Chinese, taught to
Hmm.
him by his Chinese mother. So, like, his mother tongue, whether he wants to believe it or not, is technically Chinese. And he did learn English. And I have a lot of friends that when they have children who are born in other countries, it's like they pick up the second language instantaneously because their little brains are hungry for knowledge. Old people, I'm going to say old people being anyone over 20 at this point, I think it's more difficult to gain the language. But I had so much empathy for that mom of, I've been silenced. The community doesn't like me. I've never been able to talk to anyone here. But the
Hmm.
thing I love the most on this earth that's still living is my kid. And my kid refuses to speak to me. And so part of me was like, even the kid was being a little quasi racist. And he was also just being a teenager. And I think in reflecting back on some of my maybe less than stellar teenage moments with my parents, I can recall not really appreciating everything my parents brought to the table. And I'll just leave it
Hmm.
at this because his girlfriend Susan, 2 years after his mom died, he's with his girlfriend Susan in their apartment. And before that, when they were helping the dad clean out the house, she's like, your mom is really an artist. Like, these origami are really spectacular. And it was that moment of having an outsider see what makes your parent beautiful, special, talented, amazing that you're just like, oh, yeah, I guess that's my mom. And it was just that interesting thing that the author did such a great job of saying often who are closest to us don't always have the opportunity to see what makes us great. And that was just so poignant. Took your girlfriend to be like, your mom was an artist. And he's like, oh, yeah, she was, wasn't she? Yeah, that just was very poignant for me.
Yeah, I think the the silence part is just something that has that resonates, maybe not resonates with me is not the right term, but has stuck with me as one of like the most haunting themes of this story, because in the end it's sort of part of the reason it kills her, because she never talks about this ongoing pain that ends up being cancer or whatever they said it was. But she could have voiced that way earlier on as soon as it started happening. But I think she had been acclimated to believe that her voice was not relevant ever and it was unwanted, that she should not bother. If it's not in English and it's not something that's useful to her husband and son, then maybe don't talk about it. It felt like she, again, I don't know that this is. Maybe it's part like a cultural thing, because I'm 100% unfamiliar with the day and age that she grew up in that specific region of China. I'm not an I have no idea. So I'm not going to pretend that I am, but I have a feeling this could also be a cultural thing. And even if we look at in American culture in the United States, where women were more of a second class citizen, I'm not saying exactly a second class citizen, they had the right to vote at this point, obviously, but when did women be able to open a credit card? It was like in the 70s or something.
In the mid 70s, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like there was still a lot of restrictions on women. So it doesn't surprise me that she sort of hushed up about this pain that she was unfortunately enduring this whole time. But I think it was cemented into her mind, oh, they don't want me to talk anyway. Like her son didn't want to talk to her in general, never mind in English. She was like, I don't want any connection with you. You are making me look bad. People are assuming that I'm like just exactly like you. Like I need to assimilate into American culture, but I'm the American here. And when he goes home and he asks his dad if he looks Chinese, he uses a Chinese slur, but I'm not going to repeat that. And his dad says, no, you don't. Instead of saying, like, here's why that's a racist question for you to be asked, and here's why you should be proud of your Chinese heritage. This, again, maybe I'm reading it anachronistically a little bit, because, as you were saying before, this is a different time period. So things are gonna be brought, questions are gonna be answered in a much different way than I think they would be answered now, hopefully.
But Joey, wouldn't you, as a concerned parent, your kid comes home and says, hey, do I look like this racially insensitive term?
Mm,
Instead of saying, no, you don't, I mean, fine, that is your position. No, you don't. You look like me. I'm an American. You look fine. Don't worry about it. Why did the dad not ask, where'd you hear that term? Why are you asking this now? Did something happen at school? Like the dad doesn't ask anything. And as a child of the 80s who had parents in a similar vein, I'm like, hey, this, and this happened. It's like, oh, well, did this happen? I'm like, no. And they're like, okay. And that was the end of the conversation. I'm like, could the other five disturbing things that I told you that led up to that answer be investigated in any way? And the answer was no, it cannot. We are not interested in hearing any of the details around that. You answered the question, yes or no, and we are moving on. And so I just thought that was also super interesting from a modern lens, looking back now. They would get the school resource person involved and he would be in a counseling session. And just there's just so many layers of other things that I think if this happened today in a modern context, this kid would have gotten much more support. But Joey, I want to go back to the mom suffering in silence. She had a cultural mandate. The mom's first memory of her mother
mm-hmm,
was her eating dirt because they were starving. And even saying that makes me want to check up. Like her mom's like, I'm going to eat dirt. So there's something in my stomach because I want to save the flour for my kid because that's what matters. And then her mom dies and her grandmother dies. And like her grandpa gets pulled out into a field and shot for being in the revolution. And it's like, this is a family that has known nothing but horrific violence from the culture in which they lived. And yet, her memories of her mom are these beautiful origamis of the magic that they brought to their community and how they were revered for the fun and the, as she said, practical magic she could bring. So I just think the author did such a beautiful job of layering this beautiful story on top of some hard truths.
mm-hmm,
People had these things happen to them. People are still having these things happen to them. And I think it's so easy for us to do exactly what the son did. I don't want to know. And the mom said, I always wanted to tell you my story, but there never seemed to be the right time or the language, right? It's
Hmm.
like, does she have the sophistication of language to be able to say, I felt as a native English speaker, sometimes it's hard enough to identify and articulate deep feelings to another human being. I can't imagine now if you're like, we're only going to speak in Spanish on this podcast now, Jennifer. Good luck. I guess I'll never say another word because I don't have the language.
Hmm.
And yeah, it just was very effective with what he did. And even some of the choices of his sophisticated language that he used. And I was like, who is this guy? Like, in a good way. Because when he was talking about one of the characters, he dipped in soy sauce and that water wicked up into the paper. And he called it the capillary action of the paper drew that up. And I was like, that is a very sophisticated concept and a very sophisticated word. So this guy is, for the most of the story, being very straightforward, very common language, just very easy to understand. But I'm like, you're just throwing a few things in there that make us go, there's more going on with this author than meets the eye.
Hmm. And I just love how important language is in general in this. And that's a good example of how the author is giving us little tidbits of this more beautiful language. Not that it's not a nice, well written story, it's excellent. It's obviously very well written. Jack has this reconciliation with Chinese in particular by the end, right before he reads his mom's note, because we have another parallel is that his mother is saying, I can speak English, but it feels very inauthentic. But when I speak Chinese, I can feel the emotion behind it. And at the end, before Jack reads the letter, the author writes, the language that I had tried to forget for years came back, and I felt the words sinking into me, through my skin, through my bones, until they squeezed tight around my heart. And that's where I started crying. And it's just like, and he just like, because you can feel the epiphany with him in that moment where you're like, oh my God, oh my God, I just realized Chinese is so beautiful. And it gave me this connection to my mom that I never had with my dad or with anyone else around me. It was just like this special thing that we shared. Obviously, they're not the only two people in the world that speak Chinese. There's a lot of people who speak Chinese, but in his world, in his smaller world, this was just like this intimate thing that he had with his mother. They could articulate stuff that they could never say in English in this native tongue of hers. And it's like the moment where I feel like he regretted. I'm literally putting this in here. It's not in there in that section where Jack regrets like I stifled my mom. And I feel like you can really feel how stifled she is throughout the story after she's told to stop speaking in Chinese, where you could just feel it's like a palpable stifling. In that one moment, Jack comes to the conclusion, I messed up, and now I know what it feels like to speak in this language that I have this cultural tie to.
And that he and Joey, I was just with you. Like when you were reading that, I started to cry. I'm like, and this podcast is
Yeah.
sponsored by Kleenex because you're going to need some at every spot in this story. I appreciated that he seeks out a Chinese speaking person. He's like, I went to a
Mhm.
tourist bus stop and I wanted to ask people. He's like, my Chinese is so bad. I don't even know if anybody understands what I'm asking them because my Chinese is really bad. Like his mom had very bad English. He's now has very bad Chinese. He meets that young woman and she sits down and she's reading that letter. I love that the author, exactly what you said, the story is unfolding. You are hearing this mother's amazing story, all the things that she wanted to say to her son, but never had a chance to. And now a
Uh,
stranger is saying it to him and is saying it, I believe, in Chinese. I did not get
yeah.
the idea that this woman was translating. She's like, I'm just going to, you said read this paper. So I am going to read this paper. The woman who read this out loud to him, she did not shame him. She did not outwardly say, do you believe this? Did you do this to your mom? Do you see her pain? And when she ends it, it said, I'm just going to read the very, very end. Son, I know that you do not like your Chinese eyes, which are my eyes.
we're
I
both,
know. It's like,
we're
oh, and you
both
don't like
about
these
to do it.
tears because I can't even do it. So I'm going to try this again. Son, I know that you do not like your Chinese eyes, which are my eyes. I know you do not like your Chinese hair, which is my hair. But can you understand how much joy your very existence brought to me? And can you understand how it felt when you stop talking to me and won't let me talk to you in Chinese. I felt I was losing everything all over again. Why won't you talk to me, son? The pain makes it hard to write.
That's rough.
We know that the pain is the pain of her cancer eating through her body and the emotional pain of the fact that the thing
Yeah.
I love most on earth said, shut it. I don't want to hear from you. And being shut down in that way was just excruciating.
Yeah, that's it's a hard as I was like annotating stuff, I was like, girl, don't ask me to read this letter out loud because I cannot get through it. I will it won't be good. It'll just be messy if I do it. So I cannot do that. But you everyone should read it, this story. It's really short and it's so beautiful. I would love to see like what happens next and like how he decides to honor his mom and engage and reconcile with his Chinese heritage. Because my feeling is that his mother was probably semi illiterate because he says that she had a childish handwriting. But because he was so young and he seemed to have spoken Chinese pretty fluently prior to him telling his mom he only wanted to speak English, but either she didn't know how to teach him how to read and write in Chinese or she did not have the skill set herself and maybe she learned it later. But again, it's just this devastating thing. Unfortunately, he had this opportunity. And again, I don't blame him. It's the society that it's at fault here. And he is just trying to survive in an environment that is feeling very hostile towards him, and rightfully so, because that's what's happening. It's so devastating that he didn't get to have this full experience in all these years with his mom speaking this language and sharing in the spoken and written and just embedding himself into this language and culture. It feels like it's so late for him. I mean, it's not too late. He can obviously still learn Chinese and learn how to read and write and still learn about Chinese tradition and stuff like that. But he could have shared all of that with his mother, and it's so sad that he did not.
It is so sad, Joey. And I have to go back to the letter because, I only cried once or twice or three times in this podcast episode. So I am not meeting my quota on this. So I'm
Okay.
going to read just a section of this because I was like, oh, so beautiful because it reflects his mother is writing something in her letter that he is experiencing in real time in his adult life. And I just thought this was very beautiful. So I'll read the whole paragraph. You grew up a little, and now you could even help your father and me talk to each other. I was really at home now. I finally found a good life. I wished my parents could be here so that I could cook for them and give them a good life too. But my parents were no longer around. You know what the Chinese think is the saddest feeling in the world? It is for a child to finally grow the desire to take care of his parents, only to realize that they were long gone. She had that experience because she was an orphan at 10 years old. He is now, I'm going to say, almost 20 because I was doing the math on how old his mom might be.
Mhm.
That he also has the rest of his life to regret the fact that he does not have his mom to take care of. And he said after his mom passed away and he was helping his dad clean out the family home, he was like, he suddenly looked really, really old. It was that revelation. I can remember being in my early 20s, kind of thinking, holy cow, I'm growing up. My parents are growing up. Everybody seems older than I remember them, and that dawning of adulthood. So when I think about this story, this is such a coming of age story that he
Mhm.
emotionally grows up and becomes a fully realized person. Because when she's laying in bed, like, okay, we're at the hospital, your mom has cancer, she is dying. He was like, yeah, I need to get back to school in California. So I've got to get going. And the mom's like, don't worry about me. Take care of your health. Schooling is the most important. And he says, I know it's like a deviant thought to want to just get out of here and go back to school, but I can't help it. That's exactly how I feel. And so he was battling with, oh, a different kind of person should feel a different emotion. But all I'm feeling right now is the self absorption and self preservation of, I got things to do. I've got college recruiters waiting for me to set the world on fire. And when he wrote, and I'm just going to read the line because I'm like, this guy just takes our heart and serves it back to us on a paper plate. So I am going to read that. Her cough took over again. An image from years ago flashed into my memory. Mom saying "I" and then putting her hand over her heart. So that was the Chinese word for love. All right, Mom, stop talking. Dad came back and I said I needed to get to the airport early because I didn't want to miss my flight. She died when my plane was somewhere over Nevada. Was that legitimately the last words you said to your mother? Mom, stop talking. And this time he wasn't saying, I want you to be silenced because I'm ashamed of you. He's saying, stop talking because it's causing you harm. It is hurting you to cough while you're talking. But it was just so many layers of meaning and interpretation. And it's like, was that a kindness? Was that being an unlikable character? Because I'm like, I'm supposed to want to be here with my mom, but all I want to do is get the heck out of here. This is way too intense. I think the author just did a very masterful job of letting us settle into that. And I think you and I have a shared experience of losing a parent or parents.
Hmm.
That Chinese phrase of the saddest thing in life is to finally have the desire to want to take care of your parents when it's too late. That really resonated. And I was like, but you still have your dad. Like you still, you
Yeah,
still
Jack
have
could
your
still
dad
do
in the
that.
story. Like he's still in there, but based on the interactions that we had witnessed, the father and son, I can imagine that the father is not a font of emotional connection
Hmm.
and openness. So
Yeah.
he may have a different kind of situation with his dad than he could have had with his mom, but now it's too late. But they both, again, this parallel of their lives, he's an orphan. I mean, at least he's orphaned from his mom at a young age. His mom had that experience when she was 10. Now he has it when he's 20, but she felt the disconnection in her life. The whole course of her life changed because she lost both of her parents. So I just think it's super interesting. As I said, I think we both said, what's the rest of the story? I want to see, does Susan and Jack get married and do they have kids and like do they have the dad come live with them? What is the end of the story? Or is there a 20-year jump into the future where Jack's teenage son is slamming the door and being like, "You're so stupid, dad. You just need whatever you have to say. I don't want to hear it." Is he going
Hmm.
to have that? Is that a rite of passage for children? Or is that something unique to this particular storyline? Don't know.
Yeah, I mean he is acting like a normal teenager at most of the stories, teenagers, and that's exact. Most teenagers are not like, yeah, I'm obsessed with my parents. I really want to hang out with them. So he gets a pass on that for sure. But yeah, it's so sad when the last thing he says to his mom is, "All right, mom, stop talking." And again, it's like a reflection of the earlier conversation because the last thing she says to him is in Chinese, and she says, "Child, like your mother loves you." But she says it in Chinese. And he responds in English. So you couldn't even give your mother this last thing. You could have just said, I love you in Chinese. We know that she says it in Chinese because she desperately needs him to know, I absolutely mean this. And this is my last time talking to
I
you.
love you in the Chinese way, right? She said when she
Yeah.
says it in the Chinese language, she feels it in her heart. But when she has to say, I love you with her lips, she's like, this doesn't mean anything. Like, this is disconnected from my heart. My mouth is not my heart. When I'm speaking Chinese, my mouth and my heart are united. And Joey, I had forgotten about that detail when honestly, can you not just give your mom this one little mercy? And one of the things that I had written down, Joey, and I know we're getting to the end of our time, is
Hmm.
that his mom tells him, go revisit the paper menagerie. Go reconnect with that. That's part of our mythical Chinese tradition that this on the Day of the Dead, my spirit will come to you, right? So there's this magical realism that's not quite explained. I know this happened for him. This
Hmm.
experience definitely, I am on the camp this happened for him. It was her deathbed request to him. Don't forget your origami. Now, she didn't articulate because I wrote you some secret letters and it's really going to be poignant when you open it. She didn't get to articulate to him. And 2 years had passed before he opened that box. and he only had the box because his girlfriend found it when they were cleaning out the dad's house. So it was like
Mhm.
all of these little building blocks that had to be together. But when I was thinking about the power of last words and last requests, like this was his mom's request of, I promise you, we will be connected throughout time and it will all make sense later. And I just really
Mhm.
appreciated that the author could take us on that journey and let us see what happened and how he said to the tiger, hey, old friend, it's nice to see you. And he said that, the tiger curled up on his lap and sat there. And it was like, oh, thank you for reconnecting to. He was born in the year of the tiger. So again, there's all of this
Mhm.
mythology there. Born in the year of the tiger, the spirit of his mother who was protecting him and looking over him, and the magic that she gave him, and the ability to believe in his imaginary friends. I think that's just such a beautiful gift to give someone, to be like, I know that these aren't real, but they're real to me and they're my friends because I don't have friends. So it's all the things his mom wanted for herself, connection and meaning and friendships and people to talk to. She gave that to her son with the Paper Menagerie. So I just thought it
Mhm.
was just so beautiful. So I'm going to leave it at that, Joey. At least we got through 5 minutes without anyone crying. So that's a good, good, good. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely a story worth reading and savoring, and maybe even sharing with your own mom. If you have a mom or a dad, maybe share this story with them and say, hey, is there anything from your past that you'd like to tell me now so I don't have to figure it out on my own on a little scrap of paper that may or may not make it to me?
Good advice. Or do that. Or learn origami and write your child a letter and see if maybe it'll unravel by accident one day. You never know.
So,
Uh,
Joey, one last thing on that, because the power of language. First of all, let's use our words. Okay. I'm a big fan of using all the words.
mm,
But the author is also showing us the power of the written language. The mom says, I need to leave this for you. I am not able to communicate this to you now because you're being a punk teenager who's not even speaking to me. But someday, when I'm gone and I know I am dying, you are going to want to read these words. And so, again, we talk a lot about the power of language, the power of writing, the durability of the message. She could have had this deathbed scene and said it to him. And, did I say it in Chinese? Did I not say it in Chinese? I don't really remember. A document's a document is a document. You can revisit that thing 150 times for the rest of your life. You never have to question your memory of, well, did I say it in Chinese or did she say it in Chinese? I don't really remember now. You
mhm.
have the document. And I love that he started writing the word I love you in Chinese on the paper that she had written. So it was again that cementing, that book ending of, oh, when you love someone and you can't say it out loud, you can commit it to paper. And I just loved everything about that message, Joey.
Same. Thank you for listening to the Extra Literary First podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And don't worry, it'll be our little secret you stepped out of your literary comfort zone. Check out our link tree to follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Storygraph.